Hey guys, welcome to another episode where I am talking to Angie Flannery, and we're talking about teens. Angie comes from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I've known Angie for a long time and she's very good at what she does. And I'm so excited to have her today to talk about parents who have adopted a child and now they're a teen. Welcome, Angie.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, as you said, my name's Angie Flannery. I am a licensed professional counselor as well as a certified social worker. I've worked in a variety of different venues. Currently, I'm the executive director of Adoption Choice, and we work with all parts of the adoption triad. We work with adoptive families, birth parents, and adoptees.
So people come to you to adopt a child?
Yes, and we help them navigate that system and work with them through the whole process.
So how many children have you united with a family?
Well, our agency's done thousands. Personally, I've been in this field about 8 to 9 years. I've probably worked with a couple hundred families, and it's different every time, and it's joyous every time it's successful, and it's really a great place to work.
Mm-hmm. And Adoption Choice, you said, how long have they been around?
We have been around 32 years, I think now.
Wow.
We recently celebrated 30 years, so I think it's 32 at this point. Yeah, we're a nonprofit. We're all over Wisconsin.
So what are the things you noticed that when you and I talked about scheduling this interview, you had said that there are some things that you notice whether an adopted child is adopted as an infant, a toddler, or an older child. Once they hit the teenage years, there are some things that you notice.
Absolutely. So we work primarily with families who adopt children as infants, but in the last couple of years, we're working more with foster care adoption as well, which is pretty exciting, but challenging for families as well. But one of the things that we notice with kids who are adopted, as you said, whether it's as an infant or whether they've been in foster care and they're adopted out of foster care into a permanent adoptive family as a 9-year-old or a 16-year-old, they still struggle with identity and sense of self. And as most teens do at that age, they're trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to become independent from their adults, and being adopted adds an extra layer for kids because there's just so much related with being adopted that sometimes you don't have all your information. And you've got, as an adoptee, you have adoptive parents, an adoptive family, but you also have a birth family that you get some of your characteristics from, you get your physical features from, and sometimes kids who are adopted struggle with trying to sort through that added layer of identity. Yeah, and then if you've got a teen a teen who had been adopted as an older child, not as an infant, they're struggling with that too because they remember those placements, and maybe they've had some trauma, and that's the reason that we're in foster care and now in an adoptive placement. So you've got a lot of that, which we all know affects their ability to problem solve and their functioning and where they're at in life. Right. Trauma definitely affects that. And then you've got trying to figure that out in your teen years as well. Absolutely. And then you add on top of that, if it's an interracial family and you look different than your adoptive parents, how are the parents helping them to develop that sense of identity and race and culture? Do you have other people in your life? Do you get together with other adoptive families who look like you? Do you take your child to functions where they see other kids or other families or even role models that have the same skin color that they do? There's a lot of facets to that sometimes adoptive families are hesitant to do because maybe they've never had a whole lot of contact with people from a race other than their own. And it's really important. And those are the things way back in the beginning with our adoptive families, we try to go through that. If you're open to adopting interracially, let's talk about what that's going to look like down the road when your child starts to see that their skin color is different.
Absolutely.
And in the teenage years, it's really, really important for them to have those connections.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine. So
Mm-hmm.
what are 3 tips that you would give parents? How would you start them out today? If parents who have adopted are watching this, which I'm hoping they are. I mean, I know it's close to my heart because my husband is adopted and my sister has adopted from Africa. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm very interested in this topic. Her son is, approaching the tween years.
Sure. I think communication is really key. It's making sure that you open that door, that there's always that openness about being willing to talk to the child about their history. It's super important. Don't be afraid to talk about it. I think sometimes adoptive parents are afraid to, because what if they want to go meet their birth parents? And I hope they know their birth parents. I hope they know something about their birth parents. What if they like them better than me? What if they want to go live with their birth parents instead of me? And so there's a lot of fears from adoptive parents, but it's really, really important to keep that door open, because it really causes a lot of confusion with kids when they don't have that information, because then they start to make up stories in their head about who their birth parents are or what it would be like, and they have these fantasies, and sometimes reality doesn't always match those fantasies they have in their head. And it's really better, no matter what their age, for them to have that information. If they, if there's some negative circumstances as to how they came to be, or how they came to be adopted, they still need to know that. Kids can integrate that, but not having that knowledge is really hard for them.
Right. Kids can handle the hard stuff.
Absolutely.
Their kids are so resilient, and with the support like agencies such as yours, and the way trauma therapy has evolved so much in the last 15 years. Absolutely. I mean, kids, not only are they resilient, but there's so much support out there that is so helpful in that case. But I understand what you're saying. Not knowing is so much worse than knowing something not so good.
And I think sometimes when we look at teens and they're struggling, it's easy to say, oh, it's just teenage stuff. They're just being a teen. And they're just being resistant and cranky and moody. But sometimes parents need to say, hey, does this have to do with your being adopted? Because it very well could be. So I think the second thing that parents need to remember is that they need to recognize that these kids have grief and loss, and to acknowledge that and not be afraid to acknowledge that. Even if they were adopted as infants, they still have some loss. They have a loss of their birth parents and a birth family. It's even more significant if they were adopted as an older child out of foster care. They're going to have even more loss, because they may have built some relationships with family. And regardless of what that birth family's situation is, and they may be a rough background, but it's still a loss. Those are the birth parents. Let them be sad about not growing up with their birth parents. Or if they know that their birth parents have other children, they might have some siblings out there that the birth parents decided they were able to parent. And so then they're going to wonder, well, what's wrong with me? Why did they place me for adoption? And then they've got 2 kids at home.
And how teenagers will experience or process grief and loss is oftentimes, like what you were saying before, the irritation, the frustration, the acting out, so it's, not only is it the teenage stage of development and possibly processing some trauma, but now the grief and loss, I mean, that's just how it manifests often for teenagers.
And think about the way that schools sometimes approach. In the middle school, you have to do a family tree or a genealogy. And there are still schools that, haven't moved to the point where it recognizing, okay, I have blue eyes and, or brown eyes and brown skin, and my family has blonde hair and blue eyes, obviously. So how do I do my family tree? And so we talk we try to educate schools too, that there are different ways of talking about that. And one of the things that we encourage are life books for kids who are adopted. So you can have that progression, especially kids who travel through foster care,
Sure.
where they have this history and they can go back and they can look at their life, because sometimes they don't have that information. So that's
Right.
one of the things that we encourage with our families, is to create life books. And
So,
there are
go
organizations
ahead.
that help with that. There's
Yeah.
pre-made
Okay.
life books, or you can just design your own. And it's really
Mhm.
about, this is my birth family, this is who I am, these are my likes, this is, and it helps to have that history for
Mhm.
kids. Yeah.
What's your third tip?
My third tip would be to just really meeting the child where they're at. We know that trauma can really stop a child in their
Right.
developmental growth. And so even though your child is 16, they might not be at that level of processing and functioning. And sometimes you may need to just meet them where they're at, especially, we're talking mostly about domestic adoption, but if you have an internationally adopted child, that's pretty common, where you are educated that those kids have spent time in orphanages or foster
Right.
homes. And they're, 16 months behind their emotional growth, or in their emotional growth compared to their physical age. And
Mhm.
so you need to meet that child. That can be the same for a child out of foster care. And so
Mhm.
parents need to really work with those kids. And you may need a 16-year-old that needs lots of cuddles and hugs because they didn't get that.
Right. Right.
So
That makes
that,
sense.
yeah, absolutely, meeting that child and giving them time.
Mhm.
You may be ready to talk about something, but they may not. And
Right.
waiting for them, and it may be years before they're ready to talk
Mhm.
about, their birth family or
Mhm.
process some of that. So letting them have that time until they're
Mhm.
ready. As a counselor, we both
Yeah.
know that you can't make somebody be ready for change or for
Yeah.
growth until they're ready. That it's okay. It's okay to be sad about,
Mhm.
the fact that I was adopted, even though
Mhm.
your adoptive family, has provided you with
Right.
everything and love, and everyone loves you in your adoptive family. There's still that, yeah, but, no one else I know, which probably isn't true, because,
Right.
most people are affected by adoption in some way, but it can feel like you're the only one that's going
Yes.
through this. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, so waiting for them to be ready for that. And it really adoptive families need some support in that as well, because they
Mhm.
will doubt that. They're like, well,
Mhm.
what am I doing wrong that they don't feel
Mhm.
safe? Um,
Mhm.
you might not doing anything wrong. It's
Mhm.
just a natural growth process for them.
Mhm.
And some kids won't. Some adopted kids won't go through that. They will be,
Mhm.
they'll say, you know what? I know I'm adopted. I know I have a birth parent out there somewhere, but I'm okay. I'm okay not knowing. But
Mhm.
if they do want to know, we should be helping them to
Mhm.
process through that. And it may not be that they want to meet them, but they may just want information. May
Mhm.
want to know, what were they like? Did they have the same
Sure.
hair color? And many times what we find, I've done a few reunions with
Mhm.
adopted children who, when adoptions were more commonly closed, they were 19, 20, and they want to meet, they've never met their birth parents. And we help them. And you find that there are so many similar characteristics between the birth parents and the adopted children. Sometimes they have even the same hobbies, and they have no knowledge of their birth.
Yeah.
So there are, and that's building connectedness. And we
Mhm.
all know being connected, feeling connected is important to growth and sense of self.
I've got, like, I could ask you a million questions.
Yeah, and I
And
could
I
talk
know
all day about it.
I know we'd run out of time, but that's, I one of the biggest things that I'm hearing you say is, like, you know, keep the lines of communication open, meeting them where they're at, but just being patient and supportive.
Absolutely.
However, also, parents, adoptive families, adoptive parents, they need support too.
Absolutely.
Sometimes recognizing when they might be mixing their needs with their adopted child's needs, that, you know, I don't want to feel insecure, so I'm hesitating talking to them about it, and helping them sort of kind of recognize that.
We recognize that, and we help support them and give them the services that they need as well. It's a joint venture.
If anybody has any questions, you know, you can certainly comment below on this video. You're going to find it on Facebook and on my blog, and I'm sure Angie's going to share it on her social media and possibly on her website as well. Well, thank you, Angie. I appreciate you being on and all the knowledge that you just dropped. My mind is a little blown a little bit about some things, so I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.